Welcome to the webinar, Ask Us Anything. We're so excited to be here today for this, all of us. Today we have Professors Bob Sutton and Hayagreeva Rao. And as we move through this session over the next hour, if you're enjoying the insights and you'd like to learn more, you can check out both Bob and Hayagi's courses. Within the certificate, they have been linked directly in your dashboard. So you can kind of play around with that and find it. And we're going to jump right in today. So if you would like to learn more about Hayagi and Bob's backgrounds or anything about Taleisha, you will find all those resources linked in your dashboard. I'm not going to go for the lengthy introduction. Without further ado, Bob and Hayagi, it's always a pleasure. Take us away.
Thank you so very much, Robin. And Bob and I are, of course, delighted to be here with our audience today, and we're all the more gratified to be here because we have our 1,000th graduate, Taleisha Garrett. And one of the things that Bob and I thought was we might actually begin by, having a short conversation with Taleisha, and then opening it up for the Ask Me Any question format. So Taleisha, thank you for being so generous and sharing your time with us. Congratulations on being our 1,000th graduate. So what I wanted to sort of ask you was, how would you sort of describe getting to this, the arc of your career, so to speak, getting to this stage? Are there milestones? Are there stages that stand out for you?
Thank you, Hayagi, and thank you all for having me here. There are certainly milestones that I would say, have been anchors or pillars to get where I am today. And when I think about milestones, I think about those moments that are really transformational, that really help me grow and go deeper. And I can't help but think of a couple that stand out the most. One is, this was the moment that I learned that my success will never climb higher than my character. And I learned this moment early in my career, thank God. I was fresh out of undergrad. I had gotten a really cool position at a pretty cool company. I was a junior financial analyst, and I was living the dream. I mean, I thought I had it made. I had arrived. There was a team of like 7 or 8 of us. We were all young, ambitious. We were single, so we could work 18-hour days. We were all in, and it was fantastic. And I started getting acknowledged for the value that I brought to the table and the skills and abilities that I had. And, I was getting promoted and recognized pretty quickly. And then there came a moment after a couple years where it just kind of hit a plateau, and I was still delivering, I was still performing, but I wasn't getting promoted anymore. And I started to get really bitter about it. And I started to feel very entitled and very just arrogant, really, thinking that, here I am, I'm giving it all, and why aren't they promoting me? Like, why don't they see me? And out of pure bitterness, I left the team I was on and took a lateral move because I thought, a new team is going to make all the difference. I just need to be in a different place, and they'll see my value, and I'll keep getting promoted, and my career will just skyrocket. And about 3 to 4 months after I left the team, they promoted someone who I onboarded and trained to lead that department. And I was devastated. I was convinced that this person stole my job. I was convinced that it was personal. I was convinced that they were out to get me, and that, this wasn't fair. And after a lot of reflection and talking to mentors and coaches, I learned that I wasn't getting promoted because my attitude was really poor. And I had really developed, and like I said earlier, an arrogance of entitlement, because I thought that my skills were all I needed, and I put everything I had into developing my skills. But I missed, there was a saying that, you left dead bodies in the path. And I didn't realize that. And so I was so focused on getting the job done right, that it went to my head and I didn't realize how much damage I was creating. And that was the moment where I realized, wow, okay, my skill will only get me so far, but my character and how I interact with other people is what will sustain me. And I took about 2 or 3 years and really started doing a lot of inner work, thinking about who do I want to be, and who, like almost like an identity crisis of who am I? You know, I had spent so much time being who I thought I was supposed to be, and focusing on the skills I thought I was supposed to have, and focusing on the next job, the next title, the next upward movement. And once I realized that it was so much deeper than that, I started becoming a lot less impressed with titles and positions and, salaries. And I was more impressed with like the inner person of, tell me what's behind the title and the position, and really help me understand you as a person. And once that lens shifted for me, and I don't think it was a coincidence, but that's when my career really started to take off, of when the lens of focusing on building a solid foundation took place. That was probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned as far as in my professional life, was that my skill set will only get me so far.
Thank you for that. Beautiful account, Taleisha. It's an account characterized, I would say, with searing honesty and self-reflection. Thank you. Here's the way I heard you, and I wanted to run it by you. And the way I heard it was, the big aha for you was, hey, I need to move from skill to self.
Yes.
The real thing in life is not choosing one job or another, or being promoted to one job or another, but really what matters is which version of yourself are you choosing. Is that a reasonable way to say what you said?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think for me at the time, I was so confused about myself. I had so much. I grew up pretty, visually you can see I'm a Black woman. I'm biracial. My grandmother is Caucasian. My mother is mixed. And so I grew up in this space of not really being clear on which version of myself was acceptable, and not really being clear on who I was and what was important. And always feeling this sense of just being othered. Feeling like, there was a box that I just, for the life of me, could not fit into. And so when I entered the corporate space, in my mind, that was my opportunity to fit inside the box. That was my opportunity to, if anything else, I'm going to be the best performer here. I'm going to outshine anyone I can. I'm going to be in this box of what corporate success is defined, or at least what I thought it was defined as. And, that didn't work. And so through that phase of self-reflection, I realized, fitting in the box may not be the goal.
Right.
Maybe the goal is not to fit in the box. What if this otherness that I had felt all of this time is really my superpower? What if I can embrace that and start to, rather than reject the pieces of myself that I felt were other, what if I can start to embrace that and leverage that, and learn more and gain the confidence in being able to show up, and being other is okay. And that really settled for me when I had my daughter, because we live in a predominantly Caucasian area, and she's brown skinned. And so when she started asking questions about her otherness, it really started to highlight in me the areas of my otherness that was important to embrace. And again, how do we take this, what feels like something we should change, and embrace it as something we can really accentuate?
That's very beautifully put, Talisha. And, the way I sort of heard it was in phase one, your emphasis was on, hey, conformity and
Mhm.
assimilation is sort of what matters. And then phase two actually is no, it's me getting in touch with my best self or who I am. And I'm curious as I listen to you, and I imagine many in the audience are obviously listening very intently. Might you actually sort of share with us this tension between being an exception and being exceptional? Is one an
Yeah.
exception in the eyes of other people? And do we have to be exceptional in the sense of getting in touch with our exceptional self, or is it the other way around?
I think we become exceptional by getting in touch with our best self. But
Mm,
I think sometimes we only get the drive to become exceptional when we realize we're not really the exception, if that makes sense.
mm. That's well put.
And so I think that, for a long time, I was the exception. My mom had me at 16 years old. So all the odds about what success looked like and what kind of environment you needed to breed success were against me. I grew up in a relatively poor community. There were no silver spoons in sight. Once I started, I had this drive early on to know that I wanted to go to college. I knew I wanted to go to college, but no one else had done it. My uncle graduated college and he was the first to do it. And so there was just a lot of exception just in my upbringing of you beat the
Mhm.
odds, you beat the odds. And so that exception is what bred in me this idea of I am, I thought that I thought that the exception was like I had hit the lottery or something. Like
Mm,
it was this luck of the draw where
mm, mm,
it's just me. It's just me,
mm,
and this is just how I am, and lucky me. Uh,
mm.
and it wasn't until I started to go through the cycles of learning, like, oh man, I really need to focus on my inner self. Like I can't. Some of these outer things are not going to sustain me. And I started embracing all the things that made me the exception and looking at those from a reflective place and saying, you know what, there are some really good skills and abilities that I do have, and that's okay. And yes, there are a lot of areas where I may be the exception for some, but there are some exceptional qualities that I have and that I can embrace and that I
Lovely.
can bring to the table. And so, although, yes, there are a lot of things in my upbringing that were stacked against me, there was also a lot of work and effort that I put in to ensure that I would be exceptional. But
Right.
I found that, as I said a little bit ago, like some of that feeling of an exception and that otherness, I've really been able to embrace that and turn it into somewhat of a superpower of, yes, I am different. And you may think I'm other compared to your lens, and that's okay. And that's okay. And in that, there are still some amazing qualities that I've naturally have and that I've developed and continue to grow in that I'm going to bring to the table as well.
Now, Talisha, coming back to what you were just sort of saying, one question I had was, what did you think of the SI and the learning opportunity? Was that like a gym for you to help you choose a different version of yourself, or was it merely a place where you got a certificate and a credential, or how would you describe the courses? I mean, and what happened to you? That's kind of what I'm interested in.
Yeah, it was certainly a gem, I would say. As I've gone through this journey, I've just kind of, I don't know if I've become cynical about it, but I'm less impressed with credentials, right? So I certainly, I'm rarely a fan of, unless it's something compliance related, I'm rarely a fan of getting a certification for the sake of saying I have a certification. It just doesn't make sense to me conceptually, and it's a waste of time, frankly. This, in the case, was such a gem in that, you know, one of the strengths that I realized I had was this kind of going against the grain, challenging the process, I'll say, and thinking outside the box in all those terms that we now call innovation, right? But I didn't have a good framework to really bring that into a corporate space, because oftentimes innovation is looked at as entrepreneurship. And so one of the things that I think the biggest lesson I've learned, and the reason why this course was a gem for me, is it really taught me about entrepreneurship and how do I take those entrepreneurial mindsets and apply them into the infrastructure of a company, and how do I embrace the going against the grain, and embrace the challenge in the process, and embrace the asking lots of questions and developing an innate sense of curiosity to inspire innovation in the workplace. You know, for me, I don't have a desire to be an entrepreneur. And I used to connect entrepreneur and innovation as one, like that, they go hand in hand, and they do. But I learned from this program, I can also bring that innovative mindset right where I'm at into the work that I do. And it's been great. My directors have certainly noticed a difference and provided lots of feedback, and embrace the ideas of, let's look at this like it's our own enterprise. What will we do differently? You know, how do we show up differently? How do we lead differently?
Music to certainly my ears and Bob's ears as well. So as you think about innovators, or as you refer to them, entrepreneurs within an enterprise, so if you were to think of like a simple equation, entrepreneurship equals two variables, curiosity and generosity. So I'm wondering, what do you think is the relationship between curiosity and generosity? Is it additive? Is it multiplicative? For an innovator, do you need to have curiosity squared multiplied by generosity, or curiosity multiplied by generosity squared? And you can imagine the variations therein. What's your take on what matters?
Yeah. I think curiosity and generosity are directly correlated, and I think they are exponentially correlated. I think that curiosity, if I had to put this in an equation, this is my language now, I think that curiosity to the nth degree equals the absolute value of generosity. And I think that the more curious we are, the more we are willing to give and be generous in giving. And that could be giving in time or money, but also giving in thought, giving in deep thought, giving in energy, giving in support. And so I think that whatever the topic is, the more curious we are about that, it exponentially increases the totality of what we're willing to give into addressing that curiosity.
Yeah, oh, that's beautifully put. I mean, that curiosity itself is an act of giving. The act of asking a question itself is an act of giving. I really like that. I've often thought questions are gifts, you know, and that's, so asking about questions, might I ask you a mischievous question?
Sure.
So what's the toughest question you've asked at work, for example? Of your boss, of your team, of anybody? Toughest question you asked anybody? Or even of yourself?
The toughest question I've asked was, I had a really contentious manager. And this was, she was almost, I mean, she was not much short of a bully. She was just really authoritative and hierarchical, and it was her way or no way, even if it didn't make sense. And she had this rule. And at the time, I was a relatively new mom, not her issue at all, and the company was going through trying to be more accommodating to working virtually and being more flexible with start and stop times. And she was adamant that every day we had to be there at 7 a.m. regardless. No ifs, ands, or buts. You were there 7 sharp. And that was just the rule because she said so. Well, I had a childcare arrangement where there was a day where my nanny or my sitter was not able to get my daughter to school, and so I had to take her to school. And so I'm like, this is non-negotiable. I'm going to be late. Take my daughter to school. It is what it is. And we get there, and she had this whole conversation with me about why I needed to be there at 7 a.m. and why this was important for the team. And I looked at her and I said, demonstrate to me how me being here at 7 adds any more value to you or the team. And she had no answer. And she was frustrated that I questioned her authority. And I said, we continued and I shared, I'm not one for rules for the sake of power. So if that's not going to work for you, I'm happy to engage HR and I'd be glad to lead your team. That was probably the most provocative or provoking question I've asked.
It's a very powerful question to ask. And, and as I listened to you, one of the things I just quickly flashed across my mind was how leadership sometimes pays attention to voice of employees, but completely ignores their lives.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what's the point of listening to an engagement survey if I don't understand your life, that you have to, organize childcare and do a bunch of things? I mean, this is life.
Right.
Really, that was my God, what a memorable encounter. Now, since we're talking about the world of work, I'm going to throw in another mischievous question. Bob and I like a little bit of profanity, and so let me introduce that to you. And I'm wondering, in your work life, what was the biggest cluster you were ever part of? And you don't need to name the names of products or business units or whatever, but the biggest cluster that you were part of.
Yeah, this is one that I observed, I'll say. I wasn't directly a part of, but observed. Mm-hmm. And at a company I was working at, we had implemented these communication boards, if you will. And the idea was that you would have a communication board at every part of the manufacturing journey for that plant. And they would have things like quality and safety and people and whatnot. And every morning at a certain time, you would walk the leadership team, which I was a part of at the time, would walk the boards and really try to get status on the current state of production and manufacturing. And so when they went to implement this, the ground rules were pretty simple in that it needed to be started small and organically grown, and it needed to be led by the employees. So pretty straightforward. So you can imagine what the leadership team did. They did the opposite. So they put boards everywhere and they drove it. And the employees were adamant in saying, this is not the right time. This is more invasive to our space than adding any value for us. You're actually taking away from productivity. This is not a good fit for us right now. And the leadership team, being as hierarchical as they were, they said, nope, we got a mandate. We got to go do it. Well, they didn't get a mandate. They got a set of framework to implement, but they read that as a mandate. And so, so every several weeks, we had a VP of our manufacturing, the entire division, come and they'd walk the board with us. And it was pretty systematic. They came at the same time every few weeks so they could predict it. And one of the weeks that they came, the employees, because they weren't getting heard, had gone on every board and erased the row that said people, sending the message that the people don't matter. This isn't about the people, this is about you. And simultaneously, at the start of the meeting, they started blasting over the intercom circus music. And if you could see everyone's face when that happened, it was priceless. And that was certainly the biggest cluster I've observed, because our director had no clue what to do. He was so caught off guard. He had no idea what was happening. And, we all kind of looked and we said, well, they've been telling you this. They've been telling you this isn't going to work. And so that was their way to get the message across, was to play circus music across the VP walk that morning.
Wow, what a story. We've actually had a couple of questions kind of coming in, right?
Yes, Huggy, we do.
Okay.
We have a lot of great questions.
Yeah. And Taleisha, please feel free to join us as we respond to these questions. But before we leave, are there any parting thoughts, a piece of advice for our listeners?
I would just say, if you're here in the program and you are earning this certificate, ensure that you go back and apply it. I think one of the biggest waste that we offer is the amount of knowledge we consume without sharing it back out. And so I think the more you can adopt it, internalize it, make it your own, and then share it would just help with that. It's that generosity component, right? The more curious you are about the learnings you've gained in this program, then you can give that out to where you work, your families, et cetera. Because all of these concepts apply to so much more than just work.
Yeah. Oh, this is this is actually a beautiful gift to our audience, saying, hey, if you don't use it, you lose it. So what's the value of your curiosity unless you're generous? Really, really well put. Thank you for leaving us with this thoughts about not just your experiences, all of which were riveting, but this idea that the innovation mindset is this beautiful multiplication of curiosity and generosity. Let's all join in giving Taleisha a warm thank you and our gratitude and congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Much, Taleisha.
Thank you.
Thanks, Taleisha. So Huggy, Bob is giving it some valiant tries. He may get on, he may not. But what we do have right now is we have many awesome questions that have come in.
Okay, can you quickly sort of curate them there? Because I'm looking at the chat option. Can you quickly read them out?
I can. First question up. Huggy, can you think of your top few tips to be a better leader? Someone is asking you, Huggy, what are they? If you could help someone out with that.
Oh, this is a really good question. Who's asking the question? I'd like to recognize the person asking the question too.
I'm so sorry, Huggy. I'm looking at it from different...
So whosoever asked the question, thank you so much.
Yeah.
The most important thing about really leaders, to my mind, are recruiters. You can't do anything on your own if you're a leader. How are you going to do anything on your own unless you recruit people? So the most important thing to understand is that as a leader, your fundamental task is to be a recruiter. You've got to get people to do things for you. What's going to help you the most? Being a hippopotamus who constantly opens his or her mouth and doesn't listen to other people, that's not going to help you. Instead, being an elephant helps you. Being patient, using all of your senses to listen and understand your environment keenly, that's actually what's going to happen. That to me is really the essence of leadership. I think, put simply, leaders are people with a huge help muscle. It goes back to the generosity issue that Taleisha and I were just chatting about just a little while ago.
Excellent. That was Anna. I asked one of my colleagues. Anna asked that question. Anna, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Anna, for asking that question. Hopefully that was of help to you.
Absolutely. Okay. Huggy, is there any specific pattern or format to present new ideas to managers if you're an entry-level individual or employee? Have any tactics?
Great question. Great question. Let me kind of quickly speak to you about two bodies. Who asked this question again?
I will know in a minute.
Yeah. Yeah, I always want to recognize the person who asked the question. Maybe we'll track them. So whosoever asked the question, thank you again. Let me share with you two bodies of research. One body of research shows that if you present a superior, or for that matter, anybody, with a fully finished idea, you're implicitly asking them to judge you and not help you. So finished idea leads to judgment, not help. What kind of idea leads to help? And roughly finished prototype of an idea is a better idea to elicit help from the leader and the audience. So therefore, have rough ideas so that others can add themselves into the idea and actually develop it further. So that's one body of research. The other body of research is when you present an idea, your job is not to persuade people, but to persuade. That means you don't want to sell the idea to them. Instead, you want them to be ready in order to listen to the idea. So always think about persuasion, not persuasion. In this case, how would you persuade somebody? You might persuade somebody by saying, hey, this idea came up because just not my effort, but it was part of a team effort. And that way, when you do that, you're immediately persuading the audience, for example.
Excellent. Thank you, Huggy. And that was I might be pronouncing this wrong. First name A-T-I-T, Atisha.
Atisha, yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Okay. How about this one? Also from Atisha, how do you deal with a constant pushback to new ideas? This breaks an individual's confidence in succeeding or taking their thoughts to a new level. Can you help with this, Huggy?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. I think the most important thing is at which stage. The key thing to understand is great innovative organizations are also very good at killing good ideas. From the perspective of an organization, if you have $100 and 10 ideas, the easiest thing is to allocate $10 to each idea. And here what we are doing is we're starving really good ideas of resources, and we're nourishing bad ideas when they ought to be killed. But great organizations kill good ideas too, so they actually put money in earlier. The most important thing is, when is an idea killed? And I think that's what organizations aren't good at doing. In fact, the question kind of reminds me of an imagery where, in most organizations, there's like a committee often called a murder board or a murder committee that kills not only the idea, but the person with the idea. We need to think of less threatening ways of killing the idea. And I don't know whether you recall this, but in the Scaling Up Excellence course, for example, we had a case study on right solutions where they use market mechanisms to kill ideas. So when peers kill ideas, it's a little more acceptable when a boss kills an idea, because a boss killing an idea also translates into some level of personal invalidation, as your question implies.
I could see that too. I mean, it's a much different thing. As an employee, you internalize everything that your manager or your leader does or says. And so it's just a much different thing if it comes from, well, the market won't bear it, and then it just gets killed. Thank you, Huggy.
Yeah, that's right.
We have a question from John Magnuson. He said, do you have suggestions on how to work through core value conflicts that are emerging during the pandemic, such as the telework option versus office only?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the real challenge, the pandemic, of course, has had a huge effect on all of us. And the effect it has had is it's actually induced many of us to think about reinventing the firm. Bob and I wrote an article for the McKinsey Quarterly some time ago, and maybe we'll make it available, Robin. In this article, what Bob and I suggested was one way to think about the pandemic is it's actually about leading in uncertain times. And the imagery we used in that article was people are in a room called fear, and if you're in a room called fear, you're going to be risk averse and you're likely to have tunnel vision. You need to be in a room called hope in order to imagine what is possible and what can be done. But the journey, getting from the room called hope to the room called fear requires passageway. And one of the things that Bob and I were arguing in that article is what the pandemic has done, particularly with the advent of remote work, is it's actually transformed the psychological contract between the boss and the subordinate. Pre-pandemic, if you were a boss, your subordinate worked usually in front of you or in some close vicinity to you. You could physically observe the subordinate, monitor the subordinate. And subordinates also worked with other people in teams. Now, if you're a subordinate, you're actually likely to be alone, working at home, for example. And if you're a boss, you can't see the subordinate. So monitoring is a problem. If you're alone, commitment is a problem. So one of the things Bob and I suggest is the passageway from the room called hope to from the room called fear to the room called hope is what we refer to and what the research refers to as your best self. Taleisha hinted at that too in her wonderfully reflective and honest conversation. So what's the best self? Your best self can easily be captured in 2-3 words, which are verbs or adverbs, that is actions that best describe you. And what's the nature of the psychological contract? The employee comes to work with his or her best self, and the boss's job is, or the boss's obligation is, how can I give you opportunities to express your best self? Because when we bring our best self to work, rather than our tired self, our fatigued self, our angry self, obviously we're highly motivated. We don't need much monitoring. That's the nature of the psychological contract. Now, hopefully that gives you a sense of that's what's going to make it easier to actually get into this, what you refer to as navigating these choices. The other thing that Bob and I argue in the article is when you're reinventing the company, by going fully remote or by becoming more distributed or what have you, you also need to re-onboard your employees because they're not working for the same organization anymore. So to my mind, the value conflict is less a choice and it's more a question of getting your best selves to come. And the best self exercise and this psychological contract will rapidly allow you to focus on a group of values, but a group of values that aren't abstract words, but accessible as behaviors.
That's great, Huggy.
A bit of a long answer, but hopefully that was helpful. Bob's here.
Bob Sutton.
We can see you, Bob. Thank you for your persistence.
I'm here?
You're here.
We can see you. I know Bob's looking very surprised.
I just
What
gave
did I
up.
do?
Bob.
For everyone.
Bob, that was tenacious and true grit. Thank you very much.
Fabulous.
Anyhow, I don't know what happened.
Well, you're here now, and we have a question from Dongmin, and they're asking, and this is great because you guys have so many experiences with entrepreneurs and industry. In your opinion, what are the common attributes of successful entrepreneurs? Are there any difference of people who are successful in a startup versus a big enterprise environment?
Well, I better talk given that I've been muted for a while. So I defer to my buddy, Michael Deering, who Huggy and I have been working with for about a decade. Michael's funded about 200 startups. Folks might want to look under Harrison Metal. It's just him. He's sort of like a solo guy. And he's got some characteristics. One of them is essentially black and white thinking. That's one of the cognitive distortions that entrepreneurs tend to have, is it's either great or it's terrible. If you're in a more complex corporate environment, that's probably better. They also tend to think that there's something special about them. Not necessarily that they're better than anyone else, but they're just sort of cursed with this sort of specialness. And just strategically, and then I'll defer to Huggy, since he does a lot of work in this area. What good entrepreneurs tend to do is they tend to have a more narrow problem that they solve perfectly, and then as the company grows, they'll tend to expand. But they tend to be sort of like a rifle shot, is the way our friend John Lilly would say it. So what would you add, Huggy? Those are some of the.
No, that's actually a great list of things, Bob. If I can jet ski a little bit behind you, let me kind of emphasize the similarities to complement what you mentioned. I would think that entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs, they're both insurgents. It's just that the constraints they face are different. If you're an entrepreneur, your enemy is outside. Because you're an insurgent, you're very much like a social movement activist. What's the most important thing about a social movement activist? They have a cause, they got no money, they got no people. And that's the first job. They got to get them. They got to get people first, and maybe a little bit of money. In an organization, the intrapreneur too is an insurgent, but often the enemy is within. Friendly fire is the problem, as opposed to enemy fire. And so the challenge in large organizations, therefore, is how do you actually protect your entrepreneurs by insulating them from friendly fire too early? You need criticism, you need questioning, but not too early, but much, much later. And so I would say that those are the similarities, with the difference being the constraints vary.
Excellent. Thank you both. Huggy, this is a question about, and Bob as well, scaling excellence. So for people who are thinking about, taking some courses within the certificate, I don't want to say this wrong, you are as asking, what are the major suggestions on scaling? So if you can just overview just a couple of scaling suggestions, both of you, so you can kind of give them a little sneak peek of what they could get in scaling excellence, that would be great.
Let me go first, and then Bob can join in. Is that okay, Bob?
Sure.
So very quickly, Bob and I wrote this book, Scaling Up Excellence, because we were in a very successful executive program called Customer Focused Innovation. And people in the last day of the class asked us, what does it take to scale? Bob gave some answers. I gave some answers. Later that evening, as we were drinking wine, we were deeply dissatisfied with our answers. And Bob said, what do we do? I told Bob, I said, we're Stanford professors. Bob says, what the hell does that mean? I said, Bob, all it means is when we don't know a subject is when we offer a course, because it'll force us to read up. Look at Taleisha there. She thinks it's hilarious. And that's what we did. The first time we offered a course, we couldn't even it was we created too hard of a problem. Remember, Bob? We asked them to,
yes.
we asked Stanford students to make sure everybody bicycling on the campus was wearing a helmet. And we randomly assigned guns to students. And I remember rightly, one of the discussions we had was how to grade them, and we thought maybe we should grade them by the number of people in each dorm who wore helmets while bicycling. And the students, of course, freaked out a little bit, and they said, hey, what about effort, and what about this, and what about that? I remember that. But anyway, high-level takeaways. First thing, scaling is not footprint, but mindset, how you make culture accessible to people. Second, scaling is not doing more of the same, it's reinvention. Bob, you want to add a couple of other things that we learned as well?
Well, yeah. Well, to follow your perspective, to me, the two main decisions, which Huggy and I, they sound easy, but in real life, they're really hard. I guess the three main: when to go fast, when to go slow. We did a case of Uber, which is quite interesting. They just put pedal to the metal for too many years and got into so much organizational and technical debt they still haven't required. The second thing is addition versus subtraction, something that we've followed in a lot of detail, knowing when to add and how to subtract. For big organizations, I think Netflix is an interesting example. Organizations that know how to subtract have a huge advantage. And then the last thing, we call it Buddhism versus Catholicism, by which we mean is the decision about what we insist on having everything done in the exact same way everywhere, versus what we allow sort of local variations. So just, as a quick example, IKEA, one of the reasons they were successful in entering into China, even though they had mostly the same product, maybe 90% overlap in SKUs, was that they figured out culturally they needed more assembly and more delivery service than in other markets. So that's just, if I would pick the sort of three: fast, slow, addition, subtraction, and if you will, customization versus standardization. Those are the strategic decisions we see over and over again. And if somebody tells you that they know the one-size-fits-all answer for those, they're lying to you.
Yeah. So, hopefully what you'll sort of get out of the courses is really a set of tools, and I think, as Taleisha was earlier mentioning, frameworks, so that you can then figure out what is it that you need to do, how you need to customize, and the like.
Excellent, thank you. So let's do a little bit of a speed round here, because Bob, you are, for the man who doesn't like to go to meetings, I know that you need to leave for a very important meeting within 3 minutes. So let's just do a little speed round. So Bob and Huggy, can you help answer why good ideas die? Bob, why don't you go first so we can make sure that you are departing on time, and then Huggy can give us his take.
Well, good ideas die in part because it's really hard to tell good from bad ideas. And then I would just add for fun that sometimes good ideas should die, because if you've got too many good ideas and you try to develop them all the ideas end up bad in the end. That's out of the Steve Jobs playbook. So that's my style.
Well said, Bob. The only thing I'd like to add is, remember that every good idea is built on the ruins of another good idea that died.
Yes.
It's built with the ruins, not on the ruins.
Those were great, and I love the fast speed popcorn round. Let's try one more. What is a key trait in your opinions, Bob? What is a key trait of a successful leader? Like when you go in, you're like, this person better have this thing. What is it?
Well, I mean, first of all, if anybody who tells you that they know the one key trait is misleading you and exaggerating, so don't believe what I'm about ready to tell you. But if I was going to pick one thing, I would say that the best leaders know what it feels like to work for them, which sort of sounds like mushy empathy. But if you're a good leader and you know what it feels like to work for you, you also, forgive me for saying this, can influence, dare I say, manipulate people to do stuff that they don't want to do. So it isn't all sort of warm and fuzzy and kittens and everything.
That's fair. Huggy?
I think I have little to add. I think Bob put it really well. Because context matters so much.
It really does. Bob, it looks like you made a true cameo appearance today. We really appreciate your perseverance and great. I know. And when you popped up, we were just as surprised as the rest of us when you popped up.
So we're going to get different, and I apologize for the technological struggles, but such is the modern era we live in. Thank you all so much. It's a delight to be part of the program.
Bob is signing off, but we're going to stay. Bye, Bob.
Bye.
Bye, Bob.
Bye, Bob.
Okay. Huggy, I'm going to put forward another question for you or two. We'll see how we do on time. And then we're going to put a poll up and ask the audience what they want to see more of. Okay. Oh, Taleisha, here's something that you can chime in with Huggy as well.
There you go.
Yeah. How far have you, so your entrepreneurship efforts within your organization, so you took the SI&E courses, you did the certificate, and you're in Boeing, which is a big organization. So did you find that you were able to apply those principles within your department, within your team, maybe within a smaller working block? Someone is asking specifically about entrepreneurship within your role and organization.
Yeah, happy to share. So we have had some really good successes in this space. So I do workforce, I'll try to keep it brief, but I do workforce development for the enterprise, and our team is responsible for reskilling, upskilling, essentially developing the entire workforce with the exception of manufacturing. So we do all non-manufacturing functions. And historically at Boeing, they've been very traditional in how we do learning. So it's just, here's a bunch of courses, take what you want to take, but there wasn't a lot of continuity as to if those courses were actually adding value to the business, not the individual per se, but the business overall. And so an approach that we took was, let's halt open enrollment courses and let's start looking at roles and the skill gaps in those roles and providing learning for those roles to close those gaps and tie that directly to the business. And for about a year or so, it was really, it was a major culture shift and still is in a lot of ways, but we just were getting a lot of resistance to approaching learning that way. And the thing that really resonated, and this was actually touched on earlier, was we started coming to executives with incomplete ideas. We started coming to them and saying, I'm kind of sort of thinking maybe this. What are your thoughts? What would you do? Where are your gaps? And what we ended up with was they kind of put together our picture for us. And it was their idea. And I think, so we've seen success in that. Now we're at a place where we're scaling it across. We just finished engineering and we're scaling it across the other functions, which is a huge feat. But I've learned in this entrepreneurial space that it has to be not about me. It has to be about the idea. It has to be about the result. It has to be not about me. Once it becomes about me, then it doesn't work.
And we're just 1 minute off ending here. Huggy, thank you so much for rolling with the punches as we do. We really like to, keep it real and spice it up on these webinars, don't we, Huggy?
We do.
And Taleisha, thank you so much to you. Just as a reminder to everyone, we're always really just so happy to have everyone join in. It really, we're on the other side of the computer, but for us, it's just really nice to have the back and forth of the Q&A and just knowing that you're all out there. Thank you so much for joining. And this will be a recording that will be sent out to everyone. So if you want to review anything that Taleisha or Huggy or Bob shared, then you'll have that ability. And thank you everyone for coming, and we're going to end the webinar now. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you, Taleisha. Thank you, Robin.